The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Forging Your Career Path, offered by the Oregon State University Alumni Association in partnership with Oregon State's Continuing Education Unit. I'm Greg Aronoff, the Marketing and Communications Manager here with Workspace. I'm joined by Yulia Dennis, who is from the Alumni Association, and we also have Russell Borne and Jessica Latham. Welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So before we get started, I'm going to share our agenda for the day. Like I said, I work for Workspace, which is the non-credit arm of the university. We partner with colleges across campus to offer open enrollment classes to the public on subjects ranging from professional development to gardening to beer making. And we're always excited to continue our partnership with Yulia Dennis from the Alumni Association. And I'm sure some of you have joined us for our other webinars on the career series. So we're excited to have everyone here and talk about forging your career path. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it off.
Thank you, Greg, for the introduction. And it's always great to partner with OSU Workspace on the career webinars. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is a topic that I'm excited to bring forward to our OSU alumni community. And my name is Yulia Dennis, and I oversee our alumni career services programs at the OSU Alumni Association. I love what I do. I love helping people with their career goals. And whenever I have the opportunity to introduce great speakers, it always makes me really excited. So we're just going to keep moving forward through the webinar, and I'll be moderating our webinar today. So during the webinar, feel free to ask questions in the chat box, and Greg's going to be the one to monitor that, and he'll bring up questions as they come up. We'll be addressing them throughout the webinar, and this is going to be recorded, so you'll get a link at the end. After a couple days will go by, we'll put together information for you, learning outcomes, etc., and then get that emailed to you. I want to spend just a few moments sharing about our career services. So I oversee our alumni career programs, and we offer all kinds of one-on-one and other career support, resume reviews, etc. So if you have a career goal and you're thinking of forging ahead in your own career path, then do reach out to me, and I'm glad to help you out with your careers. And the other thing too is if you're someone who has career advice and you'd like to help other people, whether it be students or alumni, I'm always glad to help you figure out how to do that as well. And for today's webinar, we're going to be looking at career decision making, and this is great advice no matter where you're at in life or in career. And we are going to be looking at what it takes to successfully start a new career path, and then how do you actually develop a plan for forging ahead. And I do want to say that this webinar was created in a partnership with our College of Liberal Arts and their alumni relations. I'm really grateful for them for bringing this topic forward and then for helping me to connect with Jessica and Russell. So I will go ahead and first have Jessica introduce herself, and then we'll have Russell. So Jessica, go ahead and share about yourself to the group here.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Jessica. I can see on the screen I graduated from OSU in 2008 with a BFA, and I think around the time of graduation I kind of realized that although art was on my brain front and center for so long of my life, even before college, I realized that I was not an artist. I was not someone who really could sustain myself in an art practice. I didn't really know what that meant, so I took a few years off and then realized that my passion was indeed in the arts, but in an art and culture administration way. So I went and got my master's at Syracuse in museum studies. And from there, I came back to Oregon. I worked in the arts in the behind the scenes for about 6 or 7 years. Until I had to make a pivot and landed in this project manager role I am in now at Adidas.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica. I'm really excited to have you here and sharing about your experiences. And then next we'll have Russell introduce himself.
Hi there. Yeah, it's really good to be here too. Thanks for having me. Similarly, I also graduated from Oregon State University in 2007. I've, similarly to Jessica, always seen myself as a visual artist and continue to work in that way. But I've also kind of always enjoyed working in multidisciplinaries, from design to construction to technology, and I'll see that as part of my art practice. Currently, I'm a co-founder of Carnation Contemporary, a Portland gallery, and acting, currently serving that co-op as their brand manager. After receiving my BFA from Oregon State University, I took some time off to try a bunch of stuff, which I'll share about later in this presentation. And then in 2014, I got my MFA from Cranbrook Academy of Art, where I studied sculpture, with the majority of my career being in design and art-related industries. For both small and large companies. I ended up kind of, after a course of series of good fortunes on some happenstance with some good opportunities with different companies, found myself at Adidas, and here I lead the North American brand design team. And yeah, I'm excited to kind of share more about that journey and how I got from point A to B.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. Jessica and Russell, I'm really glad that you're both joining us and sharing with the OSU community, and I can't wait for us to hear more about your tips and advice. And we'll hop right in with Jessica sharing about life being a journey.
Great, thank you. This is sort of my number one mantra, especially when I am switching roles or considering a new role. I really truly believe that there are no steps backward in life, that all of the experiences that you've gained up until this point that you're starting to question things are all transferable, and it might not be apparent immediately. But even like the really hard, stressful times, you had to do something to cope. You've upskilled yourself in stress management or et cetera. So I really truly believe that full-heartedly that there are no steps backward. And I live this because actually my first role at Adidas was a role that I previously had straight out of college. So I kind of had to self-talk myself into this. I was an executive assistant right out of college, and then I took an executive assistant role at Adidas to get my foot in the door. And I've really came in with an outlook that this wasn't a job that was beneath me. This was something that I could excel into and propel myself out of, but I have all these great skills and so much more knowledge now that I did then that I can do so much better at this job. And then my second point on here was that you learn from your mistakes and your successes, and I think you actually remember your mistakes so much more than your successes. Which makes the that fun interview question, what are your weaknesses, like the hardest, or I guess maybe the easiest to think about. At least for me, I don't dwell on my successes as much as I dwell on my mistakes at all. But instead of dwelling on your mistakes, I try to internalize that, how to do something better next time. I really believe in taking responsibility as soon as possible as well, because I think as soon as you switch your mindset to ownership, you can move forward from there.
That's really great advice. I love that idea, especially about taking ownership. And then next, Jessica's going to share about transferability.
Yeah, and I touched on this a little bit too, that all experiences are transferable. And what I really mean is that even if you've come from a different background, you have valuable experience in what you've lived through before. And another personal example is that I'm currently a project manager for finance at Adidas, and my background has solely been art. I've been art and culture It's been my only focus and my only real pursuit in school. But I end up in finance. I've actually ended up in a few finance roles along this journey, but I really kind of laugh because I don't know anything about numbers. But I'm consistently being told that my background is valuable because of that. Like, I can offer something to my finance peers that they don't necessarily have because they are siloed in their finance world. So where they can excel, I can sort of let them take the reins, but where they lack in creativity or even just thinking about problems from outside perspectives, that's where I excel. So really you have to look at this as whatever you have to the table, whatever you have that you can bring to the table is valuable and important, and it might not match what's on paper, what they're looking for. You just have to, it's about finding the vocabulary to really like shout out what you can bring.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's really good advice. And I liked how you shared about just how your own art experience translated to now this new role in Adidas and stuff. So I think that's really cool. Next, we have a poll question, and this is for the audience. So the poll question is, do you currently want a new job or career change? And this is going to help us to learn about the audience and find out more about you.
Okay, so we'll watch the answers come in, and we'll let it run for a little bit longer, but it looks like the majority is yes, with overwhelming percentage of nearly 85% say yes.
That's great. And I think that'll help us significantly with the rest of our presentation too. And also, I think it's cool that some of you aren't career changers, but you're still here wanting to learn more. And I think that's a really great thing to do. And we're going to turn it over to Russell on, I think, a really great topic for this, for forging ahead, which is about failure and how to view failure. So Russell, take it away.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, failure is, I think failure is just so real for everyone. And I think learning how to deal with it and how to learn from it was something that I had to get used to really quickly. Right after graduating in Oregon State, there wasn't a whole lot of jobs on the market in 2007, if any of you recall. And so I just spent the next 6 years or so freelancing, taking up clients, whatever I could, doing graphic design, anything. It was just kind of odd job, creative, trying to hustle for a job here or there, failing along the way and learning from it. And I think that with every failed client or job, it honed in what I was actually good at. I was kind of felt like I was good at a lot of different things, from carpentry to logo design to painting or whatever. And really, like, you want to find what your specialty is. And I felt with every failure, you learn something really valuable about yourself, not just how you deal with failure in general and how to get back up on your feet, acknowledge your failings, take responsibility for them, but also then like how to not do that again, or also like what your strengths are, and continue to hone in on the things that you're really great at and move away from the things that you're not. There's also this idea, the second bullet point down, about freedom to not be perfect. I think there was some careers. For one funny story, one of many odd jobs, I was cutting hair. I was sort of a pseudo stylist, and I was like cutting friends' hair, friends of friends' hair. And I thought I was getting good at it until I ran into some people who actually had strong opinions about their hair and really failed hard. As you can imagine, it didn't go well. And really kind of learned from that and was like, okay, that's actually a fun hobby and that's not a career, and I'm not going to continue down that path. And I think acknowledging what you're not good at, acknowledging what you don't want to do, feels really freeing as well. And you can say, I don't want to keep hitting my head against that wall, and I'm going to go a way that feels more free. I think in life, there's you land in these kinds of grooves where you're like, I'm really feeling good about this kind of work and about this kind of thinking. And you should, when you find those grooves, you want to kind of stay in them and hone them out. And then that last point is just, yeah, like I said, letting yourself fail and just being like, yep, that's not for me anymore. And then take responsibility for those things and move forward. There is, and I'm not sure what I'm doing on time, but there's this great example of a failure that I made. One of my first bigger clients was this Japanese company called Snow Peak, and I was hired to design and publish their e-commerce website. And so I built it all out. It took me like 6 months of programming, which I didn't know much of at the time, but this was like 2003, so it was pretty minor kinds of programming. And when it finally published, there was just riddles with errors and even just typos, as well as, bugs in the programming. And, for me, it was a big flop, but I learned a ton from it, and then learned how to resource correctly and get the right people on it, not trying to do everything on your own, but reach out to those people who can make you successful.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think those are really great lessons. And a follow-up question for you is, so you tried many different things, and a lot of people, I think, can relate to your experience of trying a variety of things. And so how did you end up ultimately coming to Adidas from the variety of experiences you had prior to that?
Yeah, great question. I think with that process of honing, I was so broad about my ideas of design and art, trying to just make a lot of things from web design to logos and e-commerce sites. And I honed it in slowly and built some good relationships with some clients who really propelled my career forward by saying, hey, we really like the work you're doing. And then that client I was telling you about, Snow Peak, that flop actually turned into quite a good relationship. And working together over the course of the next 3 or 4 years after graduating from OSU, they eventually hired me out from being just a freelancer for them to being a full-time brand manager. And over the next 4 years working with Snow Peak, I built a huge amount of skills just in managing their brand. Over the course of those 5 years, just building a lot of good relationships with the industry, found a good friend who was a talent recruiter at Adidas, and thought that my experience from all the variety of work I did in the past, as well as the very specific work at Snow Peak, gave me a skill set to manage their studio here at Adidas. So it was kind of that combination of the broad skill base of managing budgets and all the things that came along with being a freelancer for so many years, but also that honed in expertise on managing an international brand. So a little bit of both, but I do think that it was that constant polish that was able to get me into the position I'm in now.
That's so great. And I'll post this question to both of you. What were key mistakes, or what was a key mistake that you learned from that ultimately led to a successful career path or a new career? So how were you able to leverage some past failings and mistakes?
And we'll do Jessica first, and then we'll do Russell for that question. And that's a really good question.
Yeah, that is. I think there are a bunch to choose from, but to sort of piggyback on what Russell was saying, I definitely thought maybe my next move after, going to art school was to teach. So I taught a painting class for a while and quickly discovered I was not a teacher. And it was actually a really great learning opportunity. I don't think I was a terrible teacher. I just know that it was not for me, and my students were lovely and I just couldn't sustain the energy. But I don't think I would have ever known that if I had tried it out. Also, one mistake that I sort of tend to make over and over again, and that's something I'm always reminding myself of, is I tend to stay too long in a role, especially when I know that it's past time for me to leave. And that's not necessarily a career-ending mistake, but it's a mistake that has sort of led me to not thinking open-mindedly about my future, or I get really pigeonholed and like, well, I have a current job, I'll think about that later, even though I know that the time has passed. So I'm trying to be more proactive about that. And I've learned in my current role that I love and that I'm not ready to leave, but to think about what's next while I'm in a good place, rather than to think about what's next while I'm struggling in my role looking for an out.
That's really great advice. And Russell, how about you?
The teaching one was actually a great one I was going to reference too, but I'll think of a different one. Yeah, I mean, quickly, just shortly on that, as I think that's coming up in my next slide, is kind of about trying everything, is that you don't know what you're not going to be good at or not going to love. Because I thought I was going to school to get my master's to be a professor, and then after teaching some classes afterwards and during that time, I was quickly realizing that that's not for me either. But beyond that example, there was a pretty good one where I thought I was going to be kind of in a more of a fashion industry, and actually had this really funny job where I was making CAD drawings of it was this New York company that I can't remember their name of now, but I was doing all these CAD drawings of like old lady dresses, and it just was so not my interest that it didn't last long, and then was then a big career shift where I was like, okay, I'm not interested in that anymore, and I'm gonna redirect my energies into more visual arts.
Thank you both for answering that question. Next, we have a poll question, and Greg's going to introduce that one. So it's going to be, what industry are you in? And then actually go ahead and just type it into the chat box there. And then we'll have Russell describe more about trying different things. And then as he's talking about that, go ahead and put your comments in. And so,
yeah, so kind of,
yep.
Sorry. Yeah, so kind of piggybacking off of what I just kind of brought up, trying everything was a big part of my career development. And I just think it's really valuable for everyone to not turn down something because of preconceived ideas, because those skills add up, and those experiences add to where your true destination is going to be. I had a job in carpentry for a number of years that seems so different from what I'm doing today, but it's also skills and lessons that I still pull from, of just geometry and metrics and building with my hands, things that I really value, even if I hated that job, as well as some of the stories I was telling you about web design and taking on any client possible, clients that I would never want to put in my portfolio because their design objectives were just so opposed to mine. But with every single experience, I learned a ton, and you just never know what you're going to learn from it. And I think it's just all so valuable. Experiences in finance, like Jessica's explaining, all of that adds up to a much more robust experience and things that new employers are going to really value and skills that you'll draw on for the rest of your life.
That's great. I love that advice. I think it's very, very fitting for pretty much in any stage in your career. I think it's really sound advice. So Greg, what were the poll responses for that one?
Yeah, it looks like the leading industries are real estate, high tech, marketing, and environmental consultant.
Great. So very diverse set of industries, and if you have an industry you're trying to get into, you can go ahead and put that in the chat box as well. And then I do encourage you, if you have a question, submit your questions as well. And then next, we're going to have Jessica share about trusting your instincts.
Yeah, I think this one lends itself to what I was saying previously really easily. I think trusting your instincts doesn't come naturally to everyone, and that's okay. I think it's a learned ability, and I am trying to hone it every day. I think that for me, when I realized that I should have trusted my gut is usually after I didn't, and then there's a instance of, oh shit, this is what I was thinking of this whole time. I'm sorry, I just swore on the webinar, but I'll try not to do that again. I think that knowing yourself and trusting your instincts can be separate, but they also work to strengthen each other. So like I will know myself better the more I trust my instincts, and I think I'll have better instincts the more I know myself. But it's a muscle that we have to work out all the time. And that goes back to when I was saying I stay in jobs too long, or I try to talk myself out of things. And this role that I'm in now, it was a good example where I was sort of offered a role that I had originally thought I had grown out of. But it was at Adidas, which is a company that I have really admired for a long time and have wanted to get into. So it was kind of I spent a good chunk of time mulling that over. And then once I realized that this is my path forward, my gut had told me this is what I was saying to you all along. So I'm really just getting better at listening to that. And I think that my second bullet there, where it says seek self-understanding, and I don't know what it feels like for everyone, but for yourself, really honing in on what it feels like when you have a gut instinct that's trying to pop up. And I know that maybe I'll equate this to anxiety, which I experience pretty often. And what really helped me get through some of my most anxious times was realizing that I get really anxious before something really good is happening to me. And just noticing that, like, hey, when I decided to go to grad school and move across the country, I was very anxious and panicking and just didn't know if this was the right decision. But as soon as I could grasp, like, of course, this had to happen to me a couple more times, but as soon as I could grasp that I get really scared before I decide to jump into something new or, go on a really great island vacation or whatever. If I get really nervous about it, it's usually because this is going to be a very positive experience for me. So personally, that's an example of me trying to seek to understand myself, that, okay, if I'm feeling scared, then I need to actually go closer to the thing that's scaring me.
That was great. As a sort of related question, how do you view risk? So how do you know when it's time to take risks? Do you have a process that you go through? And I'll throw it out to both of you. How do you yeah, like I said, process risk and make a path forward.
So Jessica, go ahead and answer that first, then Russell.
Okay. Thanks. I'm a pretty analytical person, but I don't do charts or lists or get a quorum of friends to go over risk. I like to internalize it. So I mull over risk personally for around a day is my risk assessment process. But I check in to my gut, and I think that's where I like to lend my intuition. Let me reverse that. I tend to rely more on my intuition when it comes to checking risk more than tangibles. So that's why I kind of don't put it out to like my husband or my friends as often as other things that might not be as personally affecting, so like job changes or moves or like going to grad school. These were all internal, personal gut checks first, because it doesn't matter the tangible risk. Like if it doesn't feel good to you first, then it doesn't matter if the reward is great. Like you need to be fully aligned with the risk personally first.
Thank you for that. Russell, how about for you?
Yeah, I mean, somewhat similarly, I also feel like in these moments where there was great risk, even just quitting my job at Snow Peak to take this job at Adidas seemed like a no-brainer, but it felt really big and it felt scary and it was still a big risk. And to me, it is still an internalized process because although I do like to bounce ideas off of my friends and family to get their take on things, there's been plenty of times in my life where the thing I was really excited about opposed some of the ideas of my friends and family, and I needed to take those leaps, and I was glad I did. But it is all because checking in and doing some soul searching was always a decision, like, is this thing going to not necessarily be enjoyable, but be something I'm excited about, or gets me to a place that I want to go. Sometimes there are stepping stone risk decisions where you're like, well, this isn't exactly what I want, but it's getting me closer, and it's a risk, but I see the future or the end result of this decision, and that's what I want, and those are worthwhile risks. And I think checking in instinctually, is this a risk that will bring me some happiness? I think that's what we all want out of a career also, is that it brings us some joy and satisfaction. Without that, it's hard to wake up at 6 a.m. to work on a presentation or whatever else you have to do.
Thank you both for your responses. And a lot of what you described requires courage and being true to yourself. And I think that's a great theme to have for that question. Next, we're going to have Jessica talk about learning. That's another one that I think there's like a few key takeaways that I think will help people a lot in their career path. And I think this is one of those.
Yeah, I think that this is super important, and not only does this make you a more well-rounded person in general, but if you are always open to learning new skills, new processes, it's much harder to unlearn something. So you're just going to add more talents to your bag, or deepen your personality and your horizons. And you might, like we both, Russell and I touched on, we tried teaching and we realized that this wasn't for us, but you might not know that you absolutely love something unless you learn about it first. And so this is something I try to do in my job as much as possible, is to set time aside for learning new things. And Adidas is actually really wonderful about building that into employees, like 90-day plans. But I think even if I didn't have an employer who was encouraging me to constantly learn, this would be a big keystone in any job that I would take in the future, is my ability to learn beyond my role. But I think the biggest takeaway is that I just think you're a better person if you are open to learning. But I think I'll just reiterate that you don't know everything. You don't know everything that you love. So don't shut yourself down to that before you might find something magical.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jessica, for that. Next, we have another poll question. And I think that this one is a great one. It's your biggest fears around career design and goals. And we've talked a lot about that, and Jessica and Russell have both shared some of theirs as well. And we'd love to know from you what those are.
Yep, and so the answers are coming in. It looks like right now there's two. Being stuck in a role that I won't like is the clear winner. And I'll keep the poll open for a little bit as they come in, but basically that's the number one, and not making enough money is closely followed by that.
Yeah, thank you everyone for responding to that. Next, we have Russell with saying yes to things.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yes, saying yes is, I feel like I'm beating a similar drum here, but I think it's important to reiterate, opportunities don't come to you all the time. And when they do, I'm just prone to saying yes. And I feel like it's a mantra for my life that has gotten me in places that I'm really happy for. And also in places where I got to reassess and say, well, I'm glad I said yes to that, and now I won't say yes to that again. There's an example. When I was living in New York, I was a gallery assistant for this gallery, and a New York gallery seemed like a fabulous place and where I wanted to spend some of my art career. Quickly found out after 6 months of being an assistant that that's a pretty brutal place, and didn't really want to be involved with that, but found a lot of joy in some of the elements of running a gallery. So I said yes to another opportunity a couple years later to manage something a little bit more in my line of values, which was this co-op called Vessel and Page in Michigan, and that was so much more enjoyable. And although shortly lived, because I didn't live in Michigan for more than 2 years, I now run this gallery that is really fulfilling in Portland called Carnation Contemporary. And I think saying yes to all those opportunities as they came to me taught me a lot, and also kind of narrowed in my path towards the kinds of things I want to say yes to in the future. I mean, I think that goes as well with saying yes to a lot of work at Snow Peak. When I was first hired there, I was just a associate graphic designer, and saying yes to new opportunities within that company built my resume, built my experiences, and also propelled me to where I am now. I took on things that was outside my comfort zone. They would say, would you want to help design a retail store in New York? And I would be like, absolutely, yes. Even though I had no clue how to do that, saying yes to that and extending and learning new things built that repertoire of skills and assets that catapult you to the next thing. And so I would recommend keeping your eyes open for opportunity to say yes to. and then and then learning from it.
Thank you, Russell. And I think the next topic that you're going to talk about, hobbies, relates really well to that idea of saying yes to things and exploring.
Yeah, so hobbies, it's really funny. When I was in undergrad, I had a professor there who really kind of beat into our heads that this idea of hobby being a dirty word. You know, that a hobby is if you're an artist, a hobby is you know, unprofessionalized. And he really beat into our heads that like that hobby is a great thing, but professionalizing it and making it a career is a much more exciting thing. And so in all of my kind of experiences, if I was interested as a hobby to program websites, I would take it serious and treat it like an entrepreneur and treat it like I wanted to start a business and be professional about it. And it really kept me from letting that passion of art fall off as just a hobby I do on the weekends, and let it be something I really took serious and read books and learned from and tried to make a business out of. I think that it really kind of helped me, to the last bullet point, keep my values aligned. And sorry, there was a weird notification on my computer. and it kept me focused. So nurturing your hobbies to me is finding out that a hobby is a passion, and then how to nurture that, how to bolster that, educate yourself. You know, if haircutting was a hobby, although I didn't want to continue down that path, you know, I found that it was something I enjoyed, and I started taking classes and finding out how to start a business in that. So I think that treating those hobbies more professional is a much more exciting way to go about.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And then we're gonna talk about some design principles. And I think that in thinking of the question that the audience just answered about biggest fears and the fear around being stuck in a role you don't like, I think this one definitely addresses that fear. And so we're gonna have Russell share the first 3 points, and then we'll have Jessica share the next 2 points. So Russell, take it away with the design principles.
Yeah, so I think it's just this reflection, like what are you doing well, like identifying those things that are your strengths and capitalizing on them. You want to, even if you're a list person, I'm kind of a list person. I like to jot down those things that you're really good at and doing well at, and then find how to hone those in. Especially like looking at where you are. There's times when this opportunity was just a little bit beyond my grasp, but I knew what I could do to get there. There was this funny job where I wanted to, sorry, I've got so many random ones. I wanted to do mural painting for this children's camp, but I had no experience teaching children. So I just volunteered, and so I did not get that job. They said I didn't have enough experience. So then I found some volunteer opportunities teaching after school art, and because volunteer, you know, like they said, yes, come on board. And then with that experience, I was able to get that grant the following year. So I think looking at where you are and finding what you can do to get to where you need to be.
And then how about the taking a risk and extending yourself as well?
Oh, sorry, I skipped that one. Yep. And yeah, I mean, that's along the lines of that, you know, how to extend yourself, you know, not to be afraid to take that risk and say, you know, what is just beyond my reach? What am I a little bit uncomfortable with? And do that. Like I really respond to what Jessica was saying earlier about acknowledging the things that scare you, and then realizing that is worth the risk, and to go for it and get closer to the thing that scares you is a positive thing, and strengthens your resolve and your ability to take on new opportunities.
Yeah, as a related note, there's a really good book. It's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. I don't know if you guys have read it, but I would definitely recommend it.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, good recommendation.
Thank you. Jessica, talk to us about goals and meeting people.
Yeah, I think that this is a super easy way to network. I don't really like I don't know anyone who loves networking, but this is a super easy way for me to network is by telling other people what you want to do. And I know that can be tricky, especially if you are looking to make a lateral move in your company, or if you want to leave your company and you can't necessarily shout to the rooftops that you're leaving and you want something new. But the more people that know that you want something, the more people that can help you get it. Especially if you are excited and passionate about your goals, people will want to help you. And then this would lead into meet people who are doing that work, setting up a 30-minute coffee chat with someone, asking them to talk about themselves. Most people will say yes, especially if it's not time intrusive. Time. I cannot use my words anymore. I apologize. I've been doing meetings since 6 a.m. this morning. So let me start over. Most people will want to spend 30 minutes talking about what they do if they can fit it on their calendar. It's a great way to find out how they got to where they are, what you might try as well. Like if they've got any advice, you can ask for advice, you can ask for tips, or you can ask for other names that you might want to chat with as well. And I think the biggest fear that might hold people back from that is just the fear of being rejected. But I think most people will be happy to sit down if you buy them a coffee and talk about themselves. But this also just like puts your goals out into the universe. And I think it becomes so much more real when you can talk to others about what you're looking for. It's hard to do it in a bubble.
Thank you so much. And we received a ton of questions, but it seems like one of the most popular ones, and both of you can answer. How do I get started at Adidas?
And Jessica, go ahead and answer that first, and then we'll have Russell answer.
Yes, that is a question with multiple answers, I think. There is a careers page. If you, I don't know the URL off the top of my head, maybe Russell does, but it's if you just search like Adidas careers, it's super robust. It will show you what jobs are open and what locations. There are locations all over the world. But also like the way I got into Adidas was through an agency, and it was a temporary job that was only supposed to last 5 weeks. It was a job that I didn't see myself doing for the rest of my life. But it really turned into this whole new beast just because I said yes to something that I wasn't super pumped about right away. So I don't know, Russell, maybe you have other advice to get into Adidas.
Yeah, I looked it up. The careers page is careers.adidas-group.com. Super robust, like Jessica was saying, and I similarly agree that there is usually like a necessary stepping stone to get in. A lot of companies this size will need to hire people on a temporary basis, but then those temporary contractors, if they do a really outstanding job, you do often land that job. So a lot of talent agencies in town support Adidas, and that's been a really common story that I've heard from colleagues here, where they say, you know, yeah, they got this one job and it was just kind of entry and temporary, and then it turned into this job, and they're really happy where they're at. there's also just a necessary amount of networking. You know, I was lucky to have met some people that introduced me to a talent recruiter here, and that was my entry point. But yeah, it's just different for everyone.
That was great. And I have another question, and we'll have Russell, if you want to answer first, and then Jessica. And the question is, how do you stay motivated when opportunities seem to be just out of reach and you feel like you aren't making progress? Maybe a better way to ask is, how do you know you are making progress when it seems like the dream is not actualizing?
Good question. Yeah, you know, I think that it's a daily battle to stay motivated to an objective. But I think that that's the main thing for me personally, is to have a really, I mean, the objective shifts and evolves, of course, but I think that there is a necessary like goal in mind that keeps me motivated, and is something that you need to develop for yourself, based on those design principles of like finding your strengths, like meeting the people you want to be, and seeing what the goal looks like. It's also really important to ask for help and know who's out there doing the thing that you really want, and asking them how they got there. And I think that what's really interesting is this idea of generosity, being generous with your time, gives you opportunities, and also it allows people to be generous with you and give you opportunities that you wouldn't have normally gotten if you were just cold calling. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Jessica, how about for you? Advice on that question?
I think that was a really great answer. I would also tag on asking for feedback, and then like actually accepting that feedback and taking time to internalize it. I think a lot of times we only want to hear positive reinforcement, but just asking for constructive criticism as well is a super important part of growing. So I think that's what I would add.
Thank you both for that. Those are really great questions, and I think that you both gave really great responses. Next, we're going to do the summary, and so we'll have Jessica share a few highlights that she thinks are key from the webinar, and then we'll have Russell do his highlights as well.
Great. Yeah, this no step backwards. This is my mantra. I think really to drive this home, I think it's spinning it up, like don't focus on negative self-talk is probably the force behind this no step backwards. I know a lot of times you can feel like you're just stuck in a job that's going nowhere, but you have to think about when you leave this job, what you're going to take with you from it. And then trusting your instincts too. I think that is something we all got to work on every single day. We need to hone that skill. We're not just going to know what our instincts are trying to tell us from day one. Like we really need to stop and listen and reflect on that. And then always being open to learn. Learning is the gateway to happiness. I think you don't really know what you want until you've learned about the thing, right?
And then jumping in, that failing is freedom is a highlight for me. You know, if the fear of failing at something is holding you back from it, then you are stuck. And for me, allowing yourself to try and fail also allows yourself to try and succeed. And the second point, be gracious and giving of your time. I think generosity is a big part of your growth. You know, in general, people want to hire people that they like and that they're feel generous towards. And I think that having that mentality in your daily life and also in your career, where you're willing to give a little bit more, knowing that the payoff may not be tomorrow or today, but the payoff is down the road. And And then that values alignment. I think that the idea there is that, knowing yourself and knowing your values, being sure that you're advancing, you're taking on opportunities that align to the things you care about and value.
Thank you both for that. That was fantastic. And thank you, Jessica and Russell, for sharing your very valuable tips and tricks. For next steps, so I do encourage all of you to join our LinkedIn groups. We have two. We have an OSU Beaver Careers for all OSU alumni students and our faculty and staff. We also have one for international alumni as well. So do encourage you to do that. And then message me a takeaway from the webinar to win a free career consultation. So that's available to anyone who attended the webinar. And then I want to share a brief follow-up. So for the second fear was about not making enough money, and that was what many of you had said as your second fear for your next job. And so I can definitely help with that as far as like salary negotiation. So if you're at the point where you are negotiating your salary, reach out to me, and that's a topic I'm deeply passionate about. And then we also do have a webinar that's already pre-recorded in our library on salary negotiation. And then a great resource for that is glassdoor.com, and that can help you figure out like what is the average salary for that particular job, and then that's a good starting point for you to negotiate from. So I want to give those tips so that we make sure to address the second fear. And then in general, do reach out to me for any questions related to your career success, and I'm always available and here to assist you.
Thank you so much, Julia, Russell, and Jessica. That was great. And I did want to provide just a little bit more information to our audience. I talked about professional and continuing education here at OSU, and the reason we like to partner with the Alumni Association and hear from our alumni is because we're often able to connect with the very widespread OSU network throughout not only the state of Oregon, but the US and beyond, and we can help provide educational opportunities for personal enrichment and professional development. Each program we offer is designed for working professionals with convenient online classes and year-round start dates. We also offer customizable team training. And again, I want to thank Julia, Russell, and Jessica. We really appreciate having you here. And this was great, and you delivered a ton of great content. And with that, I will wrap it up and say thank you so much for attending, and we will see you on the next webinar.
Thank you.